Daf Yomi, Tractate Bava, page 24a. Although because of time, last time we had to stop at the bottom of 23b. So we'll start from the bottom of 23b with the Gemara, with the words "my taima," the Rabbi Yehuda. And the Mishnah was talking about what is considered an innocuous ox and a forewarned ox. In other words, a shor tam and a shor muad. The Gemara asks, what is the reason for the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that an ox is deemed forewarned only if it gored on 3 separate days? Abaye said, it states in the verse, or if it is known that the ox was a goring ox from yesterday and the day before yesterday, and its owner has not secured it. Exodus 21:36. This leads to the following inference. Yesterday indicates 1 day. From yesterday indicates 2 days. The day before yesterday indicates 3 days, and its owner has not secured it. Here we arrive at a fourth incident of goring, for which the owner pays the full amount of damages. Bava said, yesterday and from yesterday are not to be expounded separately. Rather, the inference from this phrase is that from yesterday indicates 1 day, the day before yesterday indicates 2 days, and its owner has not secured it indicates now the third incident of goring, as it is liable as a forewarned animal for the third goring. The Rabbi Meir, my time, and the Gemara asks, and what is the reason for the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who does not determine the forewarned status of an ox by the number of days on which the animal gored, but simply the number of times, as it is taught in Brisa, that Rabbi Meir said, and now we are starting the top of 24a. With the words Richak Nigichosav Chayiv. When the ox performs its gorings at intervals, its owner is liable. It performs its gorings successively. Is it not all the more so that the owner is liable? He says to Rabbi Meir, the halacha with regard to a woman who experiences a discharge of uterine blood after her menstrual period will prove that your a fortiori inference is invalid. If her sightings occur at intervals, in other words, if she sees a flow of blood on 3 consecutive days, she becomes ritually impure. While if her sightings were consecutive, for example, if all 3 occurred on the same day, she remains pure. Rabbi Meir said to them, the case of Zava does not disprove my opinion, because the verse states in reference to the parallel halacha of a man who experiences a gonorrhea-like discharge, and this shall be his ritual impurity when he has a discharge. Leviticus 15:3. The word "this" emphasizes that in this matter the halacha requires following the instructions of the verse precisely as they were recorded, and in this case the verse associates the impurity with the zav, with the number of sightings of discharges the man observed, and it associates the impurity of the zava with the number of days during which he experienced the sightings of blood, as it says, many days, Leviticus 15:25. By contrast, with regard to the goring ox, the a fortiori inference remains in place. The Gemara asks about this interpretation. From where is it determined that this additional phrase, and this, serves to exclude a zava from having her status determined by individual sightings of blood, associating it instead with the number of days on which she experienced bleeding? Say instead that it serves to exclude the zav from having his status determined by sightings on separate days, indicating that he will be rendered a zav only if he experienced 3 discharges on a single day and not on separate days. The Gemara answers, the verse states elsewhere, and one who has a discharge, whether it be a man or a woman, Leviticus 15:33. The verse juxtaposes the ritual impurity of a male to that of a female to teach that just as the female's ritual impurity is caused by sightings on multiple days, so too the ritual impurity of a male can be caused by sightings on multiple days. The Gemara asks the derivation from the verse could just as easily lead to the opposite conclusion, but let him compare the female to the male, just as the male becomes ritually impure based on the number of sightings, even if they all occur on the same day, so too should a female become ritually impure based on the number of sightings, even on the same day. The Gemara answers, but the merciful one excluded this possibility by making use of the term "and this." And the Gemara asks, and what did you see to make you exclude associating the ritual impurity of women with the number of sightings, rather than excluding associating the ritual impurity of men with the number of days? The Gemara answers, it stands to reason that this is so, as the context of the verse deals with sightings, and therefore an additional phrase serves to exclude sightings. But can you say that, in a context where it deals with sightings, it excludes days? The exclusionary term "and this" appears in the section discussing the halachot of the Zav, in the context of which it mentions sightings and not days, and therefore when it excludes something from these halachot and limits them to specific cases, it will exclude it from being associated with sightings. The Gemara returns to the subject of classifying an ox as innocuous and forewarned. The sages taught in a Braita which type of ox is deemed forewarned. Any animal about which witnesses testify that it gored on 3 days is forewarned, and it reverts to its former innocuous status if children pet it and nevertheless it does not gore. This is the statement of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Shimon says a forewarned ox is any ox about which witnesses testify that it gored 3 times, and the sages spoke about 3 days only with regard to reversals, meaning that in order for an ox to revert to innocuous status, the ox must refrain from goring on 3 separate days. Each of these additional views on the subject combine aspects of both the opinions mentioned in the Mishnah, those of Rabbi Yehuda and those of Rabbi Meir. I would think it's incredibly rare for an ox to refrain from goring. I would even venture or dare to say that it never happened. That an ox went to gore and refrained. Animals typically don't have self-control. They either do something or they don't. But to refrain from doing something, it seems very unlikely. And they have to refrain 3 times. So either that means they can never revert back. Maybe it's a roundabout. Who knows? Rav Nachman says that Rav Ada bar Ahava says the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda concerning the criteria of deeming an animal forewarned. Rabbi Yossi concedes his opinion on this issue, and the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir concerning the criteria for reverting the status of an animal to innocuous, and as Rabbi Yossi concedes his opinion on that issue. Rava said to Rav Nachman, and let the master say the reverse, that the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir concerning the criteria for deeming an animal forewarned, as Rabbi Shimon concedes to his opinion on this issue, and the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda concerning the criteria for reverting the status of an ox to innocuous, as Rabbi Shimon concedes to his opinion on that issue. Rav Nachman replied to Rava, I hold in accordance with the opinions of Rabbi Yossi, as Rabbi Yossi's analysis is with him. Nimuke Yosef. Actually, there's a Sofer written called Nimuke Yosef. His meaning, like Rabbi Yosef's analysis is with him. It must mean it's very sound analysis. A dilemma was raised before the sages. The 3 days that the Mishnah teaches in the context of Rabbi Yehuda's opinion with regard. Some people like to say regard. I think in the Midwest they say regard to the testimony needed to assign the status of a forewarned to an ox. Are they needed to order to render the ox forewarned, or are they needed to order the forewarn the man who owns the ox to inform him that he needs to take precautions to keep it from causing further harm? The Gemara asks, what is the practical difference between the 2 possibilities? The Gemara answers, the practical difference is in a case where 3 groups of witnesses came to the court on one day, each testifying about a separate instance of goring caused by the ox on 3 separate days. If you say that their testimony serves to render the ox forewarned by determining that it gored on 3 separate days, then in this case the animal has been classified as forewarned on the basis of their testimony. But if you say that their testimony serves to forewarn the man, the ox has not been classified as forewarned on the basis of this testimony, since the owner heard all of the testimony on a single day. This enables him to say, it is only now that they testified against me, and therefore his ox will not be deemed forewarned until he has been issued warnings over the course of 3 separate days. What then is the solution to the dilemma raised above? Tashema, the Gemara suggests, come in here, a solution from a Baraita, Tosefta 2:3. I wonder if there could be like fractal graphings of the patterns of when I say Braita and Brisa. Braita, Tosefta 2:3. An ox does not become forewarned until witnesses testify against it in the presence of its owner and in the presence of a court. If they testified against it in the presence of a court, but not in the presence of its owner, or in the presence of its owner, but not in the presence of a court, it does not become forewarned until they testify against it in the presence of a court and in the presence of its owner. Furthermore, if 2 witnesses testified against the ox concerning its first incident of goring, and 2 other witnesses testified against it concerning the second incident, and 2 other witnesses testified against it concerning the third incident, there are 3 separate testimonies here, but they are considered as one with regard to rendering their statements as conspiring testimony. Therefore, if the first set of witnesses is determined to be conspiring witnesses, Edom Zomamim, there are 2 testimonies remaining here that claim that the ox gored, and the owner must pay for half the cost of the damage in each case. But the owner of the ox is exempt from having to pay the full cost of the damage, and the conspiring witnesses are exempt from paying the owner what he would have had to pay were their testimony accepted and his ox deemed forewarned, as they testified only concerning the first incident of goring, and the ox would not have to be deemed forewarned on the basis of this testimony alone. And similarly, if the second set of witnesses was also determined to be conspiring witnesses, there is 1 testimony remaining here that claims that the ox gored the third. At this point too, the owner of the ox is exempt from having to pay the full cost of the damage, and the conspiring witnesses are exempt from having to pay the owner the full cost of the damage. If the third group of witnesses was also determined to be conspiring witnesses, all the witnesses become liable. The third group is liable to pay the owner of the animal the payment for half the cost of the damage. They tried to make him pay for the third incident of goring, and all 3 groups must share in the payment of the other half of the damage for the final incident that they tried to charge him by classifying his ox as forewarned. And concerning this it is stated, and you shall do unto him as he had conspired to do unto his brother, Deuteronomy 19:19. The Gemara clarifies, if you say that the purpose of the testimony is to render the ox forewarned, the halakha presented in this Braita works out well, as according to this opinion it can be said that all the witnesses came on the same day at the behest of the alleged victim of the third incident, and therefore they were all certainly aware of each other's testimony. Consequently, the first set of witnesses shares in the responsibility of the testimony of the last group, as they are all co-witnesses in the effort to have the ox rendered forewarned.